This is a Land Rover, and it runs a little rough. In this video we're going to tune it up so that it purrs like a kitten. Or fail, we have options. I'm going to start by checking the stuff that is definitely wrong or right. After that, if it still runs rough, we'll have narrowed it down to the more mysterious components. I hope that showing this on video will be useful to some of you other guys out there, just like me. You know, the Haynes Manual Warrior. But before we get into it, let me introduce you to the vehicle. This one belongs to the neighbour of a friend. Farming folk, practical people, can build a fence, cut balls off a sheep, and are perfectly capable of general machine maintenance. They've spent a bit of money on it. New carburetor, new radiator, new distributor, and it still runs a bit like poop. Initially they contacted me for advice. Should we change this? Should we change that? And I don't know the answer to any of that because I'm an idiot who paints stuff on YouTube. But anyway, they live pretty close, so it ended up here for me to have a quick look over. I thought it might be fun. I have no intention of becoming a get an old car running on YouTube guy. I wonder what Derek Baeri's doing today. Probably dipping. How about a quick tour? This is a 1978 Series 3 Land Rover. Same year, same colour as my one. The only difference is that this one is a soft top. Well, I mean it was. We had to remove the roof to get it in here. This Rover is not road registered. It does have plates, but I suspect they've long dropped out of the system. In fact, the only sticker on the windscreen is an agriculture exemption sticker from 1985. And that's all the owners want it for now as well. The panel work's a little rough, of course, because sometimes a cow has to be moved the hard way. Speaking of animals, I think this is authentic pig smear. Anyway, we're not here to inspect the Land Rover. Well, I guess in terms of the engine, that's exactly. The first thing we're going to do is get the bonnet out of the way. It's actually super light, being all aluminium like a Ferrari. This bonnet's going to pull straight out of the hinges because the plastic bushings are missing. And there's a little split pin down at the bottom of the bonnet stay. Egots! Trying not to dent someone else's car here. So, the first job we're going to do is a compression test. Don't panic if you don't have a compression tester. This is not compulsory at all. In fact, I've never done a compression test on a Land Rover before, because compression tests are for finding suspected problems and Land Rovers are reliable. What this test will tell us is whether the 4 individual cylinders are equal in terms of generating compression. If one or maybe 2 of the cylinders are radically different from the others, that means there's a problem unique to that cylinder. Now, I'm no spark plug reading expert, but these are darker than the never-ending story. Okay, so the tester just threads into the first spark plug hole. Okay, here we go. Let's call that 120 psi. Number 2. 120 psi. Number 3. Let's call that 110. And number 4. 120. Perfect. There is nothing wrong with this engine. Now, as you can see, these numbers are all pretty much the same. If one of these was 50 or 70 psi, then we'd have a problem in that cylinder. But as you can see, there is no standout anomaly. So all else being sorted, this engine should run perfectly fine. Now there's another reason you might do a compression test. You can compare the numbers you measure to the numbers Land Rover say the engine should achieve when brand new. First of all, by modern car standards, these numbers are low. Like, hilariously low. That aside, the service manual tells us we should be hitting 140 psi for an engine with a low compression head. Tangent, how do you know if you have a low compression cylinder head? See here how the head bolts are sitting up on little plinths in the casting? Sure. Now on my motor, see how there's a big flat area next to this bolt? That has an 8 stamped into it. This is an 8-to-1 compression head. If it has a 7 or doesn't exist, then you have a 7-to-1 compression head. Anyway, 120 or 110 is a little bit low compared to 140, but nothing to worry about. Even if the numbers were lower than this, my gauge might not be calibrated that well, my method might be slightly different, whatever. Next we'll do the tappets. This is pretty easy, and it's the only adjustment as such you can make to the motor itself. First we'll take off this breather doofer thing. Bigger screwdriver. There's just a little screw underneath. People, come on. I'm not going to be able to show it, but underneath the air cleaner there's one big hose clamp that we need to loosen. And now there are just these 3 nuts on the top, which should be not much more than finger tight. These rubber seals look very old. They're not supposed to be squashed and hard like this. Alright, here we go. Try not to rip the gasket, because I don't think I have one. Now, Land Rover being the best 4x4 by far,
The best 4x4 by far.
tell us exactly what our tappet clearance should be. 10,000ths of an inch, hot or cold, inlet and exhaust. You know it's a precision piece of equipment when all circumstances are the same. If we look down in here, this thing is a push rod. That sits indirectly on top of the camshaft, and as the camshaft spins around, this moves up and down. And this is the rocker. So as the push rod goes up and down, this rocks and pushes this valve up and down. And what we need for all of this to work properly is slop. And we measure that by sticking a 10,000 thick feeler gauge in here. But the motor has to be at exactly the right position to make sure that the push rod is right on the low spot of the camshaft. And you can't see where the low point is just by looking at the valves going up and down. However, it is easy to judge when a valve is fully open just by looking at the valves going up and down, because the valve spring is taking up any slop and the point of the camshaft is much more acute, so the movement of the valve is more definite. Imagine the valves are numbered 1 through 8. Now imagine the number 9. Whoa, I know, this is getting confusing already. So this is really easy. Whatever valve is fully open, you subtract that from 9 and the answer is the valve that you adjust. Because there's a relationship between one valve being fully open and another valve being right at the low spot. And also, I don't follow any particular sequence when I'm adjusting the valves. I just tick them off a list as I go. But there is a sequence in the service manual you can follow if you don't want to turn the engine over more than you need to. So let's turn the engine a little bit. Okay, so right now I can tell that valve number 1 is all the way down, all the way open. 9 minus 1 equals 8. Number 8 should be completely loose. And it is. This is a 10 thou thick feeler gauge. And it's a little tight. 9 thou goes through easy. 11, nope. So we're going to call that 10. Perfect. Okay, so this valve is now fully open. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 9 minus 5 is 4. So this number 4 should be completely loose. So number 4 is a little loose. Let's try 12 thousandths. I can get a 12 in there, no problem. 14. I can just jam 14 in. So this one needs adjusting back to 10. It's super easy to make the adjustment. We just loosen the lock nut. Why is everything so tight? We just loosen the lock nut. Jesus. 10 thou feeler gauge. We adjust the screw until it's just starting to drag. Yep. And then tighten the lock nut. Double check. Perfect. Well, I can get 18 into number 6. Not quite 20. So that's pretty loose. So that's all of the valve clearances checked and adjusted. Fire in the hole. point of running it with the cover off was just to show you that we're hardly dealing with an oil tsunami up here. So you don't need to spread all of this red crap everywhere. Obviously this gasket is beyond reusing, but I'm going to stick it back in anyway, just for now, and tell them to order a new one. But first I'll get as much of this silicone off as possible, otherwise it breaks up and goes through the motor. These rubber seals are way past their lifespan. They should be cylindrical and squishy, not rock hard and shaped like an upside down mushroom. I know these are expensive, and our Land Rovers didn't come with piles of money on the front seats. At 10 cents a pop they cost more than 3 tea bags or 9 cups of tea. But if we could all just agree to splash out and replace them once every 2 or 3 decades, we'd save the planet 300,000 tons of bright red silicon. Yeah, this gasket is going to be a problem, I think. Because it's been squashed down so much, it's also expanded lengthways, which means it doesn't really fit anymore. So I think the main reason that this gasket leaks is because people squash the bejesus out of the rubber seals on top. You can tighten these up until the metal cap hits the cover, and that seems to be what people do. They tighten them until the nut stops turning. And then when the engine gets hot and the aluminium cover expands, it can't move upwards against the squishy rubber seals because the metal parts are bottomed out. So all the expansion goes into the cork gasket over and over again until pretty soon you get a leak. Now this crusty looking thing here is a breather, and by that I mean air goes through this pipe, through this, into the motor. This is the in hole, and look how filthy that is. These only cost a few dollars, so on my motor I just replaced it. But in this case we'll wash it out. Tasty. So I'm going to suggest they replace this, because we probably only rinsed off the stuff that was on the very surface. Next job! Next we're going to look at the ignition system. The coil and distributor are both brand new, so I expect they work fine. First we're going to set the timing using a method called static ignition timing. That means we can set it with the motor off. And then if the motor's running okay, we'll use a strobe light to set it properly. Before we look at the timing, we might have to look at this because this whole cap is a little janky. I suspect that only the finest, non-genuine, cheapest parts were used. I see, the cap is broken. No, correction, it's not broken. It's just a pretty crappy plastic moulding that somebody has roughly ground flat. Yeah. And these bendy over tabs could use a little bit more bendy. If the cap is loose, you just put a little bit more in here. I think this one was okay. And that should clip on more securely now. Much better. Okay, timing. No, cancel that. We better check the points gap first. This is really easy. We just need to bump the motor around until this little plastic piece is riding right on the top of one of the high spots on the shaft. And then we'll measure the gap. Yep, I think that's pretty good. Now our feeler gauge. This gap should be 15 thousandths of an inch, so let's just check that. There is some gunk in there though. The feeler gauge came out all greasy, so there's obviously some gunk on the contacts. Yeah, it's really filthy for some reason. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So, timing. You'll note that this lead is heading off to spark plug number 1. And right about where that sits, I've put an orange mark because the distributor turns around once for every 2 rotations of the motor. So when we find top dead center, if the rotor is roughly pointing this way, it'll be on the firing stroke. Otherwise it'll be pointing over here somewhere. There's a problem. I know you can't see anything down in here, but the timing marker is missing from this engine. Great. So this is looking at the front of my engine. And can you see down here how there's a white mark on the pulley? This is top dead center when it lines up with this point. See this pointy bracket thing? This is completely missing from their vehicle, and that's a problem. So my plan was to quickly take the spiky bracket off my motor, temporarily stick it on here so we can set the timing, and then swap everything back. But we have bigger problems. It turns out there isn't even a mark on the pulley anyway. Nothing. You see, this Rover was originally a diesel that someone has converted to petrol. Now that's very easy to do, it's really only the head that's different. So here's what I reckon happened. This head, as I mentioned earlier, is a low compression head. That means it's pretty old. I think the engine block is probably contemporary to this vehicle, but someone has gone and found a petrol engine of considerable vintage and swapped most of the parts over. I say that because up to early Series 2, there were no timing marks on the front pulley. The timing marks for the early engines were on the flywheel, and there was a little window at the back of the engine you could look through to set the timing. Now, I have no idea what flywheel this has on it, but that's irrelevant because this being a much more modern vehicle, there is no little window in the bell housing. So essentially, old mate at the back of the woolshed who put this engine together has given us no way of verifying the timing. Damn it! So the conclusion is that for this motor we're going to have to do it the desperate way. And this is really easy. We just need to stick a stick in number 1 spark plug hole, turn the motor, and when the stick sticks up the furthest, that's top dead center. Well, there's a problem with that, and it's called a circle. A circle is almost flat at the top. So we'll come back to this, but first I'll show you how to do this on a motor that hasn't had all the timing marks removed. The big point in the middle is top dead center. Moving to the left we have 3 degrees before top dead center, 6 degrees before top dead center, and to the right 6 degrees after top dead center. For a Series 3 with a high compression head, we want to line the mark up with top dead center. For the low compression head that's in the vehicle we're working on, we want it at 3 degrees before top dead center. So all we do is turn the engine over, turn the engine over, turn the engine, right there. So for a low compression head, we'd leave it right there, 3 degrees before top dead center, and for the higher compression heads, oops, too far. Now, of course, on this engine, we have none of that. There's really only one thing you can do without dismantling the front of the motor, and that is stick something in number 1 spark plug hole and try and gauge when the piston is at the top of its stroke. Now there's 2 problems with that. As mentioned, when the piston nears the top of its stroke, it's basically not moving. So it's very hard to gauge exactly the degrees of rotation of the crankshaft. Secondly, we're measuring at an acute angle, which makes it even worse. Now, clearly, I've gone full pro mode here. We have 2 C-clamps, a cantilevered ruler, an indicator holder, and a whirligig. Alright, if you're going to jam something down through a spark plug hole, you want to make sure it's soft, like plastic, and not going to break and get stuck in the cylinder, and long enough that it won't get stuck in the cylinder. So a whirligig is obviously the best tool for the job. And on our whirligig, I'm showing you now because I don't think you'll be able to see it later, there's a blue mark on the straw. But the idea is that this will move up and down as we turn the motor over. And that'll show us approximately where the highest point is, and therefore top dead center. Okay, I think I'm at about top dead center now, so the whirligig may move down to start with. Let's see. Hopefully it goes up a little bit. Oh yeah, down. Okay, so the piston's dropping back down now. So we'll lift it up here and we'll turn it around until it pops up. There it goes. Is that what? No. Never mind, we'll go around again. I need to go more slowly. It's difficult to know when it's going to pop. Easy. So, it maxes out right at the bottom of the blue dot. And right now we're on the exhaust stroke, so we need to go around once more. Right there. Alright, so I'm going to say that we're either at top dead center or just approaching top dead center. And just approaching would be okay because we do want to set this a little bit advanced, about 3 degrees. Obviously we can't hit exactly 3 degrees, but a little bit before is probably better than a little bit after. So let's carefully remove the engine cranker and our faithful whirligig. From this point, it's very straightforward. You need a test light. These are very cheap from the auto store. One side of the test light connects to the wire coming from the coil. That just happens to be a convenient place, but you could also connect it up at the coil itself. and the other side just goes to ground. I'm using an alligator clip for hands-free convenience, but you can also just ground the body of the test light against anything metal. And then using a 5/16 wrench, just loosen this pinch bolt down here, and now the distributor can turn. And then turn the ignition on. Now what happens is at the moment, the points are closed, so our circuit is complete through to ground. When the points open, the circuit will have to go through our test light to get to ground. We want to open the points on the leading edge of the cam. So because this distributor spins anti-clockwise, we're going to want to turn the distributor clockwise a little bit so that it just rides up on here. I'll show you. And there it goes. So our points have just opened and the test light has come on. That's it. Done. Static timing set. So generally you would set the static timing if you rebuilt the engine or had the distributor out or something like that. And that's good enough to get the motor running, and then you would refine it with a strobe light later. We're not going to be able to do that, so this is just going to have to be good enough. And in this case, I didn't really move the timing at all. It's annoying that there is no way to definitely verify where the timing is, but it's close. I don't think timing is the cause of our rough running. This is our next project. However, before we start playing with mixture screws, I'm going to have a look at this back of the farm hillbilly nonsense. What the hell? This spectacular piece of engineering stops the throttle going wide open. This is a return spring, and as you can see, it is hooked to the top of the air filter box. We also have extremely loose throttle linkage, bent linkage, and I'm skeptical that any of this is set up right. So let's have a look. This doesn't seem right to me. The linkage is shooting off at an angle this way, and in terms of leverage it's flat. Now it's lucky I have a spare Land Rover floating around for comparison. This rod is the right length, but this lever should be over here more, and if mine is correct it should be longer, which would move it up to a better angle. Down at the other end, which is connected to the pedal, things look more or less right. For a diesel. You see, a diesel doesn't have a carburetor on the other side of the motor. It has a diesel spreader thing on this side, and as you can see there is a disused lever exactly for that. This lever happens to be the same length as the one we really should have down here. So when they converted this to diesel, it would have been better if they used the accelerator lever that was already in the vehicle instead of something off a lawnmower. Actually, farmers don't need lawnmowers, so maybe it's off the door to a sheep dungeon. I don't know, it's not important. Another minor observation is that the throttle feels floppy. This is where the main return spring on a diesel attaches, but I think this is the longest spring used on petrol models, which should attach down here. Not sure about that. I think all of this probably works fine as is, but everything we need to reconfigure it is right here, and that will probably make the throttle action a hell of a lot better. Now this. Diesel models were fitted with a hand throttle inside the passenger footwell. This hand throttle connects to the accelerator shaft, and when I got the vehicle, it was fully on. So this vehicle has effectively been set up to run with the accelerator half down. Yep. And that's where the spring comes in. You can see this lever mechanism immediately before the carburetor has slop in it. A lot, by design. I believe what that is for is so that when you mash your foot hard on the throttle, the carburetor reaches full throttle and then there is a little bit of free movement before your foot actually hits the floor. So these guys are using the spring and that free movement in reverse. You see the accelerator linkage is half down, but the spring is taking up the slop in the junction backwards, which is enough to get this part of the linkage back to idle. I know, it's genius. Do you know what else is genius? I have no idea why someone set it up this way. The current owners didn't do it, and they're not Land Rover historians, so as far as they were aware, there was just a random lever inside the footwell that did nothing. But did the previous guy really add this janky spring because he didn't realize that the hand throttle existed? Probably not, but that would be kind of funny. Alright, with the mystery of the spring solved, next I'm going to focus on this. I want to make sure the truck runs properly before I spend any time messing about making the throttle a little bit better. Now before I attempt to tune anything, first I'm going to run into town and get some new vacuum hose because this is doing nothing. It's completely loose at this end and the other end is a ball of electrical tape. So I'm guessing we've got very little vacuum advance. Now if you're wondering why I didn't just replace the little rubber end on this copper pipe, That's because the little rubber ends are actually a step down. It goes from one size to a smaller size. And of course you can order these, but England is a lot further away than Repco. Obviously we need to tune the carburetor when the engine's warm, but I'm not even going to attempt to do that now because based on the spark plugs I think this is running super rich. So what I'm going to do is a factory reset. There's only 2 screws you can adjust on this carburetor. The idle speed screw and the idle mixture screw, which is over the other side. And the Haynes manual gives you starting point settings for those. I'm going to unwind this screw and count how many turns they had it, just in case we need to go back. Half turns at least. So about 5 half turns. That's how they had it. I'm going to take this right out now just so I can clean it up a little bit because it's filthy and the lock nut doesn't spin. So the Haynes manual tells us 1 full turn from the point where it first connects with the body of the carburetor, I guess. 1 full turn from the point where it starts to do something. So we've just made contact. 1, 2. That's 1 full turn, that's it. Next, the mixture screw, which is over the back here. So the idle mixture screw is right in here, underneath this annoying plastic cover. Sometimes it's more over in this direction. You can see blanked off holes all over the car body, so I'm not sure why they use one or the other. Anyway, the manual tells us to wind this all the way in and then out 1.5 turns. Now this plastic thing's really annoying. I'm going to get a smaller screwdriver. Never mind, this is the best we can do. I'm going to say that's bottomed out, then back 1.5 turns. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's all we can do for now. Let's see if she fires up. Fire in the hole! Okay, I'm going to open the garage before I die. I'll come back to you when it's nice and warm. The camera doesn't really pick it up, but she's smoking like an oil fire. I mentioned that this is a brand new carburetor, and it is. But these cheap knockoff carbs don't exactly have a good reputation. Just to make sure that the carburetor itself is the problem, I swapped it with mine. This is my carburetor, an original Zenith, rebuilt by just rebuilt by me. I have hand primed her a little bit, but she may take a few cranks all the same. Alright, fire in the hole! Perfect. The throttle linkage is still hot garbage, but the carburetor, wow. I haven't touched this and it's almost perfect. So it's nice that it runs really well now. But obviously I want my carburetor back. Thankfully they didn't get rid of their original Zenith, so I've asked them to drop that off. I have no interest in trying to figure out why a brand new cheap carburetor isn't working properly. I did open it up and everything looks squeaky clean and moves freely, so maybe there's a part missing or who knows. And who cares? So they just dropped off the original carb. And a rebuild kit. So I'm just going to quickly go through this and throw it on the vehicle. There is a little bit of wear in the throttle, but I think if we replace the shaft, which is in the rebuild kit, it won't be too bad. Alright, it's done. I didn't video any of this, but I did change the throttle linkage to be more like how it should be. I actually reused the spring that was hanging off the air cleaner and gave them a double return spring. Just roughly tied on with the same wire. I told them they can take it off if they want. I got a little nervous about reducing the amount of return spring on someone else's vehicle. thing runs awesome, and no smoke either. If you listen to this, it does sometimes hesitate going from idle to throttle. No problem, it just needs a little more fuel in the idle mixture screw, which it got, and now it runs perfect. The owners came to collect it, they were super stoked. It's actually going to be the 15-year-old kid's possum hunting wagon for around the farm. I forgot all about a camera while they were here, sorry about that. Maybe we'll take the camera out and see it on the farm one day, or if I'm involved in whatever happens next, you guys will see that too. But for now, that's it. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.